Welcome to On the Real Side. I'm Bob Mover, and we have a wonderful guest, as we most often do. I guess I could even say we always do have very fascinating, interesting people. And one of the more interesting and fascinating people is my old friend Saul Rubin, who's with us today. And Saul is a man of many facets. He's a deep cat. There's
Oh,
and one of my favorite conversationalists. We've been just rapping on the phone for years to each other, or when we would run into each other. It seems like you and I always got into something, some kind of
true,
interesting avenue of discussion, you know.
true,
And
true.
yeah, and so I'm really happy to explore the ins and outs of Mr. Saul Rubin.
Uh-oh.
Um, Saul, if you I could guess I should kind of describe to those of you who aren't familiar with him. One of the good things about this show, too, this podcast, is we have sometimes people that are like very well known, and you would all know who they are. And then I try to stress also the people that are kind of, what do they call it? Because I've been described like that all my life. Below the radar, is that the expression, or something
Yeah,
like that? That the musicians, the people that
right,
anybody who's been on the scene in New York for the last 20, 25 years knows who Saul is. Saul Rubin, I would
right.
say, is known. But you're not reading about him on the cover of Downbeat, and
Mm.
you're not hearing about those things. But he's made a great and continues to be making a great contribution to our art form.
Well,
Uh,
thank you, Bob.
Thank you. And most recently, like Saul's last, well, it's been a while because Sonny Rollins is no longer performing live. But Saul was a part of Sonny's last performing band, really.
Right.
And he's become close friends with Sonny, and we'll talk about that too. And you know, had a history of like having been part of that Hartford scene that I call the Jackie McLean Conservatory.
Right.
Was part of that, and was part of the early days at Smalls, like pretty much from the inception on. Saul was part of that scene. So, and not to mention one other thing, he ran his own recording studio and rehearsal studio, but mostly recording studio, known as Zebulon, for several years, and that's his nickname among us,
Yeah, it
Zeb.
was called Zebs. It was called Zebs.
It was
Zeb.
called Zeb's because
Yep.
now where did that come from? I mean, is that your planet where you came from, or
Yes.
the planet
Actually, I was in the park with my friend in high school, and he called me Zebulon, but it's actually a one of the 12 tribes of Israel is Zebulon, but he didn't know that. It's Zebulon, North Carolina or something, but it came up in a Frank Zappa tune, and we were big Frank Zappa fans.
I hear
So,
there's no Jews allowed in Zebulon, North Carolina.
oh, really?
No, no, it's not true.
Yeah, but they didn't know it was a Jewish name, I guess, if they knew.
No, no. There's a Frank Zappa tune.
No, yeah, there's some lyric about Zebulon, and yeah, about whether it was from that town or whatever it was. Yeah, we were in the park, we were kind of hanging out. He called me Zebulon, and it kind of stuck. I must have been 16. That's how long ago it was.
Wow.
Well, add five to the first number of 16, and that's where I'm at.
Add five to the first number of six. Oh, I see.
Yeah,
Yes. So,
it was quite some time ago that I was
yeah,
getting the name.
that's a ways. 61. So I'm, yeah,
66.
66. Oh,
Yeah. Yeah, add six to the first number of 16. Six,
I
yeah,
never was good at
a
math.
little, it's a little confusing, sorry.
No, that's good. So, well, let's kind of start with your history. In other words, Saul plays a lot of instruments. I may say that too. He's known primarily as a guitar player, and he's one of the best guitar players around. But I've heard him play some pretty good saxophone, and he's also pretty adept at piano. And I may have heard you play trumpet. Is that possible?
No. Well, I played
Okay.
trumpet in fourth grade to seventh grade, and I never practiced. And then my grandmother sat on my trumpet because I left it on a chair, and my parents are like, "Why'd you leave it on the chair?" And I'm like, "Why did Grandma have to sit on it?" And that was the end of my trumpet career. So we had a rental trumpet. We had to return it, and we had to pay like something to get it fixed.
That's funny.
Yeah, I never practiced. I knew when the Saints come marching in and C. That's all I really knew.
Uh-huh. So, but saxophone you played a little bit. You still.
Well, I played saxophone after I graduated from college, and I love tenor saxophone so much. And it's kind of a long story, but long story short, I listened to so much, tenor saxophone. My two favorite instruments during my education in jazz was piano and tenor saxophone. So um, I had a friend who had diabetes. He passed a couple of years ago and lived a much longer life than he had a hard time. But needless to say, he had retinopathy from the diabetes in his eyes, and he had a great horn. So anyway, I was having dreams that I was playing tenor saxophone, and it was just like I could play anything I wanted, and effortlessly. I had a great sound. I was having all these dreams, and then one day I said, God, I would wake up. I wake up. I go, damn, I can't play tenor saxophone. I was so frustrated. I said to my friend, the guy with who, and he lent me his horn, and it was a great Mark Six.
Oh,
And see, the thing was when I was young. I was very young when I had a child. I was actually 21 when my daughter was born.
wow.
It was still, you know, my girlfriend, then wife, was pregnant. And so when I got back to New York after being at Hartt School of Music, I, um, I didn't want to be a singing club date musician because I was doing a lot of club dates, a lot of weddings, corporate. We were the house band at the New York Hilton, and I must have
Uh-huh.
played every synagogue and catering hall in the tri-state area.
And did you sing
During,
too?
yeah, but I didn't want to sing because I was a bad singer, and that would have meant singing like "Beat It" by Michael Jackson and Billie Jean, and I just didn't want to be a club date singer because I have too much respect for myself. So I started playing saxophone, and then I took some flute lessons too. So I would play. I did some really awful club dates on saxophone, but I took a year to practice before I even offered my services as a saxophonist. So it was it was these dreams put me into this mode where I really want to play. And I spent a year practicing. Then I called all these club date offices and said, I play guitar, saxophone, flute, bass. I sing some background vocals and some keyboards. And the first thing they called this one club date agency. I told them I play all these instruments. They go, but do you play clarinet? We need a clarinet player for this Saturday night. So anyway, I said no. Because some of those club dates they had the klezmer music. They did the horrors and the dancing
Oh,
around,
right. Yeah.
clarinet. So I did thousands of club dates, in my youth because I needed money. And but I didn't really want to be a singing guitar player, which was what all the club date guitar players did. So the band I was in was actually a 12-piece band, and there were three horns, and there was singers. So I didn't have to sing, but they weren't working enough. So I needed more work because I had to pay my rent and feed my children. I had a son a few years later, and so
So then you had two children.
I had two children. Did a lot of club dates, and so I needed more work. So I started playing saxophone and flute very badly. And one of the bands I was playing in was so bad. They were all weekend musicians who never practiced. And I would play In the Mood on tenor saxophone. I'd play bossa novas, the Joe Beam tunes on flute. And then I would play guitar and all the rest of the stuff. And there was a singer in the band, so I didn't have to sing because I didn't want to be a bad singer. I just really
Yeah.
did not want to be. And a singing guitar player in that industry, which by the way doesn't really exist anymore because of DJs. Um, if you played guitar and you didn't sing, you didn't work. So I needed to work. I really wasn't, although I had studied at Hartt School of Music, a degree in composition, and super emphasis on jazz. I wasn't really, I didn't really have the luxury of being a bachelor jazz musician who can afford to like live with three other people in a big apartment. You know, it's like I had a family when I was very young, so I need to make money. The short and long, the long and short of it was I learned a ton of music. So although I hated it, it had a really good benefit because I learned a lot of standards. We had to learn all the current Broadway tunes. We had to learn all the Lester Lannon, Peter Duchin society stuff. So I got a really good, and also you needed to wear your tuxedo. You needed to drive to the gig. You needed to be on time. So the professionalism that I picked up from being a club day musician in my youth, I value it now. And at the time it was happening, I wasn't too happy because, you know, I really wanted to play jazz. I really wanted to write. So that was the story of my really early days right after college.
But
So
like in those days too. I mean, the let's say pre Michael Jackson club dates, and even well, not even pre Michael, but the Eddie Duchin and I mean Peter Duchin, that kind of
yeah,
Lester
Lester
Lannon
Lannon.
thing. The benefit, the good part of that was that most of the tunes that you played were nice tunes, were tunes by the great songwriters.
Right,
I mean, for the most part, you got the Cole Porter and the Harold
right,
Arlen, and and if you played the melody, you could maybe embellish the melody a little bit, and people were dancing and this and
right.
that. I had an experience with club dates. I have at certain points in my life done them, and my dad played a lot of them. My dad was a trumpet player and did a lot
Oh.
of club dates and that kind of thing. But when I came back from a tour, when I was in Europe, I was touring with Kenny Clark and Roland Hanna and East Lancashire and this Swiss singer named Miriam Klein who put the band together. And we were going to stay in Switzerland with the lady who was my girlfriend became my wife and the mother of my oldest daughter, Emily. We were going to live in Europe. And then we got news that my mother was dying,
Oh, I'm
had
sorry.
cancer. So we had to go from Europe to Florida to Miami. And this was like falling down an open elevator shaft.
Oh
From,
God.
from playing nice, beautiful music, getting to play with Kluk, getting to play, with Roland Hanna, and being treated with a great deal of respect because I'd been to Europe with Chet Baker, and I had a bit of a reputation. It was nice to be treated that way. All of a sudden, Miami, nobody knew me,
Right.
and I was sitting there, and I was like, sometimes I'd play solo piano gigs and sing, and do that, New York, which was the best tune of the night. And then
Oh God.
I burnt my tuxedo, and I
On
had
purpose?
yeah,
Oh,
I
good.
I played this club date, and the date was I'd never done it. It was accordion, guitar, and me,
Uh-huh.
and the guy sang and the accordion, and it was the only tune I kind of knew was the anniversary waltz, and I'd heard Copacabana by Barry Manilow. Every
Right.
tune of the night was Barry Manilow or Neil Diamond, and I didn't know any of these tunes. I mean, I think maybe I knew, Just the Way You Are. I think we did that one Billy Joel tune, but I only knew maybe five tunes the whole night, and it wasn't hard to fake them. I could
Right.
hear it and find my way through it. But every tune was just so terrible that at the end of the night, my friend, a drummer friend of mine, came to pick me up because he had had a lousy club date, and we hit a couple of bars after the gig, and we were driving back through on Biscayne, no, not Biscayne, Collins Avenue, and coming up from down from Hollywood to Miami Beach, and you pass a thing called Hullover Beach, and there's a pier, and I said, you know what? Give me a minute, and I actually went and I went out to the pier and took off my tuxedo down to my drawers and set my tuxedo on fire
That's
and
great.
kicked it into the ocean.
That's very good.
Yeah, except that I had called for a club date the next week and I had to get a new tuxedo.
Yeah, I knew that was coming.
I mean, or at least a black suit. Anyway, that was well, but let's talk about how you were so studious, and you were in such pursuit of the music, but life gets in the way sometimes. You got to do these things that are Very,
Yeah, but it also contributes to your music, you know. I mean, without life experience, your music could be very empty, you
yeah,
know.
I think it does, and I mean, at least you're working and you're getting to play, and that was. But let's talk about how it started. Like you grew up in New York.
I grew up, I was born in Manhattan and raised in Brooklyn, and then we moved out to Great Neck, Long Island. And it was kind of a culture shock because because we moved from this part of Brooklyn. It was near Brooklyn College, and it was middle class. For Brooklyn, it was kind of a middle class neighborhood. When we got to Great Neck, there were all these rich kids, and which I you didn't. We were still wearing ties in Brooklyn in fifth grade. My mother said, "You got to put your tie on." And I get to school, and my new school in sixth grade,
It's
no
public.
one's wearing a tie. And I'm like, I was so embarrassed, and I quickly took my tie off. They all had Izod t-shirts. Great Neck is a pretty elite town, so I felt a little out of place. But yeah, Great Neck, and then I was already into music and art, pretty early, and
How did that happen? Did you have a family? Was anybody in your family inclined to that, or like your
my
parents?
father used to try to sing like Bing Crosby a little. My cousin was a musician. So, I really got into, early on, I was really into rock, and then I got into progressive rock, and I got into, composing on my guitar, and I was really into the guitar, and really into doing a lot of painting and a lot of art.
And how old are you at this time? You're in like
Oh, I mean,
sixth
from
grade,
sixth grade, sixth grade year, what are you? I don't know, seven? I mean, 10?
11 or 12, like about
Yeah,
11.
right. Right, right, right.
Pre-bar mitzvah, right?
Yeah, right. So, yeah, actually, when the bar mitzvah period came, I was already like playing, sitting in with all the bands, and everyone would say, "Saul, you play," and we would play like Rolling Stones tunes, and sometimes the guitarists. I mean, I didn't bring my guitar, but they would say, "Oh, Saul, play at my bar mitzvah, sit in," and then the guitarist would say, "No, you can't play my guitar," and then everyone would say, come on, let him play," and then I'd play like Jumping Jack Flash, at the bar mitzvahs. And 13, yeah, my father always used to say, "You were great till you turned 13," because, I started getting into that time we all had long hair and certain, like we're all smoking, smoking weed, and like, so, 14, I was really starting to get into, I was really getting into some sophisticated music more so than just, but I always loved the blues. I always loved, I knew that through the Beatles and stuff that Chuck Berry was really important. So I used to listen to all the Chuck Berry stuff, and then I started listening to B.B. King, and then but unfortunately, my blues experience was mostly, as most young white American kids came from British guys before
Right.
you got
Came
into
there,
Muddy
Eric
Waters.
Clapton, Blues Breaker, John Mayall.
But the best one was the one black guy named Jimi Hendrix. He was the best.
Uh-huh.
He was the biggest influence, I'd say, for me on guitar at an early age. So I always say when people ask me who's your favorite guitar player, I say, well, Jimi Hendrix, Charlie Christian, and everybody in between.
Yeah,
But
right.
he was my first real inspiration, but I loved the Beatles. I dug the Stones, Pink Floyd, blah, blah, blah. Then I got into progressive rock and British rock, which kind of tantalized me because I really was, although I didn't know a lot about classical music, I really loved it. And my mother had the Toscanini, the whole box set of all the Toscanini Beethoven symphonies.
Oh,
And I listened to that a lot, and I think it really seeped into my head. So on one hand, I'm listening to all this rock and blues, and then I'm listening to Beethoven, and I love the Beethoven symphonies. So it's like a lot of different. I remember also the Ventures. That was my first record, I think, the
Walk
Ventures.
Don't Run.
Exactly.
I
And
played Walk Don't Run on
and,
guitar too.
and then the Ugly Duckling by Burl Ives. And I remember sitting around with my friends singing "Hey Jude" in the dining room. So the Beatles were really the first bit. But then when I got into Hendrix, it was like, but he died when I was 12.
Ah,
So,
I,
but
I heard him live once.
yeah,
I
I
went to
did.
hear him live, and he actually, he did Red House,
Yeah,
and that was really pretty impressive. It was too loud for me. I was like 15.
yeah,
I was not. I was already into bebop and swing and that kind of stuff. So I wasn't really into that. Though I'd started out with rock and roll, but you know, I got upset because he broke all his instruments at the end of the
yeah,
smashed his instruments and everything. And I'd
yeah.
have, you know, to get my saxophone, we had to save up money, and you know, I mean, it was just
I know. I never really. I thought that Pete Townsend and him were that became a thing, and then they didn't even like doing it after a while, but the audience required it.
yeah, it was weird. But let's say so when did Charlie Christian come in? When was the first
Oh,
jazz? When did you kind of get? I mean, Hendrix kind of led you to jazz, right, in a certain way.
well, what led me to jazz was more like the fusion because of the time period I was coming up. There's Bitches Brew, and my friend's brother had that record, and you Bitches Brew and Weather Report, Jaco Pastorius in high school. And then I started. Then one of my friends, Jeff Friedner, he had all these great records. Like he had Monk, he had Dexter, Bird, and we used to go to his house, and he would put. And then we listened to WRVR, and that was really our favorite thing, aside from the records. So I was getting into jazz, but I still didn't really
Ed
know that
Beach.
much, huh?
Ed Beach was on.
Uh,
Was he on RVR? I can't remember.
I don't remember. I don't remember. But one of the records that I fell in love with was this record by Howlin' Wolf. And that's and some of the couple of the Rolling Stones were on that record, and that record really, I really like finally heard blues that's more like the real thing, and I loved that record because I also loved the Allman Brothers. They were a big influence. So, and I was playing really well at 14. I was playing really good rock and blues, and then I got into fusion. I got into all this. Between 14 and 16, I learned more than I learned the rest of my life.
And you were in a band at this point too.
Yeah, I always played in bands from fifth grade. Yeah, I always play, and I have to credit, the part of the problem with jazz education in this country is that people are isolated. They're taught all this stuff to practice all these patterns. They might be able to play their instrument, but they have no idea how to play with people. So one thing that I was really grateful for was that I always was playing with a band. And my parents let us play in the basement. The police would come a lot, but yeah, I always played in bands and it taught me how to play in a band. I'm very grateful for that because I think it's more important to learn how to play with people with music that's not as sophisticated as bebop, if you can play the blues first and then play bebop, that's how it evolved chronologically anyway.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point.
Yeah.
I
And I
think
always say, you could take the jazz out of the blues, but you can't take the blues out of jazz. That's what my criterion for what some people would call jazz comes from that music that came from Africa. Jackie McLean, my teacher and one of my great mentors, used to say, the blues is 2,000 years old. And he talked all about the history of, in regard to slavery, in regard to New Orleans and the Mississippi River, all the history.
field hollers and that kind of.
Yeah, the field hollers, all that stuff. Because Jackie taught actually four history programs at the university. One of them was just for art students and musicians, and that one was stories about growing up with Gil Noble in Harlem, going to Gilly Coggin's house with Sonny Rollins to take harmony lessons. So when I actually met Gilly Coggins much later, and I said, I was a student of Jackie McLean, and I love Sonny Rollins, and I hear that you were that he smiled from ear to ear, that he was an important part of their education, and
Yeah, Gilly was a wonderful cat, man, and I had a interesting relationship with Gilly too. When I was playing with Chet Baker at this club called St. James Infirmary in 1970, 74, 75, I was 20, 23, 22, and Gilly used to come in, and in those days he was still drinking, and every day was his birthday. Can you buy me a drink? It's my birthday. And he would also come in. Hod would open the club around 4 o'clock, 4:30 in the afternoon, and Gilly would come in early so he could have a little afternoon taste and sit down and play the piano. And he loved ballads, and he would sit and play the piano.
Yeah.
I also enjoyed ballads and alcohol, and I would come in about 4 o'clock, 4:30. So it would be Howard would be setting up the club with maybe one of the waitresses, and Gilly would be sitting down at the piano, and I'd get my horn out and play duets with Gilly.
Right.
And we'd play a lot of ballads, a lot of, because he loved a good song. So when I met Jackie a few years after that, uh, Jackie and I were talking, and we were talking about Gilly, and Jackie said, well, Gilly was the first cat that showed me how to really play ballads
That's nice.
and how to do that. And I said it's funny because he was really the second or third cat that I used to sit and play, have the same. He said we just play ballads all afternoon. I said,
Nice.
man, I did that with Gilly too. And
Yeah.
he said, isn't that funny how we had the same experience 25 years apart with the
Yeah.
same guy?
It's really sad how he checked out though, it's so sad. Well, he
He
used to
couldn't drive, man.
yeah, well, here's the thing. I didn't know. He offered me a ride in his big Cadillac or Lincoln or whatever he had. And we're going up 8th Avenue. He's going through red lights at 10 miles an hour, not really paying attention. I'm like, oh God, I think I got to get out of the car. But I didn't because I didn't want to disrespect him. Finally, I got to my corner. I said, okay, can I get out of here, please?
Oh man, I
Well,
almost did the same. Uh,
yeah.
yeah, he.
Anyway, the story is that he was driving down a one-way street the wrong way and he accidentally hit someone and she was injured. He ended up in the hospital, the police hospital, and died there.
Yeah, well, Sam Kulak, who was his, of course, sort of his caretaker and
Oh,
guardian, was, Sam.
yeah. Not,
Sam, he produced the Gillies record and everything too.
oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, in fact, I've got the liner notes. There were three comments, Jackie and Sonny and me. We all made comments about playing with Gilly
Oh,
and everything. And I had been, this is Gilly's last well, the birthday before the accident. I had gone down to the C Note. He had Sunday afternoons over at the C Note,
the C note. Yeah, I remember
right?
that.
Avenue C, and what was it, 6th Street or something like that?
Yeah,
And,
yeah.
on the Lower East Side. So I went and played with him, and then I decided there was a little Spanish restaurant on 7th Avenue South that had like a decent steak for a decent price. And, you could have it and you'd have it with rice and beans. And, it was a great little steak. I think it might have been a Mexican place, but the steak was really happening. So I told Gilly I would take him out for his birthday. I would, come on, we'll go to, I'll buy you a steak dinner over at this place. Let's go there. So he was very happy to do that. And I said, good, we'll take a bus. And he said, no, I got my car.
Uh-oh.
And I'd never driven with him,
Oh
So
God.
he drove me over to we made it. But I mean, I was telling God in the middle of the trip that God, if you get me there safely, I'll never smoke another joint. I'll never have another drink after this glass of wine tonight, perhaps. But I'm going to behave myself. I mean, if you just get me there, and then I heard the story that he had,
Yeah.
but he had very unique voicings,
Yeah, oh, yeah.
and
I used to see him at Barry at the Jazz Cultural Theater a lot too. You
yeah,
know,
you
that's
know,
where I first met him. And then but then I would see him at Smalls. I'd see him at the St. Mark's Bar in the East Village. And yeah, that whole scene, my early New York days were interesting because, Junior Cook was still around and C Sharp and the whole Barry's place, there was such the jazz cultural theater, people living in the basement, people that I'm still friends with, from those days. Because I used to, like at a certain point, my marriage didn't work out and I needed a place to hang out and I was at the Jazz Cultural Theater all the time. And I went to all the jams and I would go and sit in. And it's such a great learning experience. And Barry would come in and I didn't spend a lot of time in his classes. Maybe I should have, but I didn't. I admit that. And but I love Barry's playing very much. So he was such a wonderful pianist, and I know he was such a great mentor for so many people. And yeah, so I spent a lot of time at the Jazz Cultural Theater.
Yeah.
And even way before Smalls or any of these places, that was like the spot, because people hung there. One night, Lionel Hampton drove up. He was driven up in a white limousine. And he got out of there was a jam session called the Art Blakey Jam Session that went from like midnight or 1 to like 4, 5 in the morning every Saturday. So you'd be there Saturday night into Sunday, and you never know who'd show up. Art Blakey didn't show up that often. It was not really often, but you never know who would come. It was quite a scene.
Did Evelyn show up? Evelyn was around.
Evelyn Blakey, I saw her a lot. Yeah,
Evelyn must have been there a lot. Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
she was
But
our
the
patron
people that
saint.
I remain, like I met my dear friend who, Clifford Barbaro, who I played with
Yeah,
for many, many years. And he was there all the time. We started playing together there. A lot of people. And there were some guys, there was some characters, this guy, Bucky Thorpe, who was a flugelhorn player, but he was a real grouchy guy. He wasn't friendly. And I got a really, he had a kind of mean vibe. So I never really,
yeah.
but I did hang a lot with C Sharp, with Junior
Jimmy Bass was another one that was
Bass.
always
Yeah.
kind of nasty to me.
Yeah, well, that's because you played alto. Because I just didn't have a thing with him. He didn't. It was kind of neutral. But the other ones were like
C sharp, you mentioned.
sharp. Except with C sharp, he was missing a bunch of teeth, and he liked to get high. And
Yeah,
when he talked, I had no idea what he was saying. But I would just sit there and listen and say, yeah, I would shake my head and say, yeah,
I
man.
did the same. I would
Right.
sit there and we would.
No idea what he was saying. But when I would hang out, so the years that I started playing saxophone, sometimes if I had a club date or something, I had both the guitar and the saxophone, I would go and try to sit in. So I went several times in my early saxophone playing days to try to play with people. And Junior and C Sharp said, come play with us. And I'm like, really? And I'm like, okay. And they invited me to play with them. I was like so honored. And after Junior Cook says, yeah, man, you really got to work on your sound. I said, I know, but I've only been playing less than a year. I'm a brand new. He go, really? That's pretty good for a year, So
Yeah,
I was really into tenor saxophone because the guitar never gave me the sing-songing quality that saxophone does. And for me, piano was much more of a harmonic um, um, informer
like a
than
workshopping instrument. Yeah,
yeah, because first of all, you get the full chord instead of having just to have 4 notes. The voicings are, guitar is very shape oriented.
yeah.
All the chords are and scales and shapes, and that's one of the reasons why it's hard to read because you can play the same notes in 5 different places. And whereas piano, I felt an affinity for piano. I did take classical piano lessons all through my Hartt College, and I was a composition major, so I studied 16th and 18th century counterpoint, orchestration, instrumentation. I did a whole year of electronic music with a great teacher named Edward Diamenti. Um, I had a great composition teacher named James Sellers, who was very contemporary, but was really a great teacher. So at heart, I kind of had the best of both worlds of a classical conservatory and Jackie McLean, Paul Jeffrey, Walter Bishop Jr., not Walter Davis. Walter Bishop Jr. was the artist in residence when I was there. And then Jackie Byard once every Wednesday. So
Really?
Paul Jeffrey came up from he was teaching both at Hartt and Rutgers, and he would come up, and he was really I learned more from Paul Jeffrey about jazz aside from records because he was really he was honest to a fault. That was part of his problem. He was honest to a fault. So he had some students crying. So my first experience with Paul Jeffrey, which was great, was he had an arrangement. He was also an arranger and encouraged me to bring arrangements. Anyway, he had an arrangement on Coffee Pot, which is J.J. Johnson's, I hate this word, but contrafact on Little All God's Children Got Rhythm.
A
So
teapot. Was it tea? Was it called?
Coffee Pot, it's like dun dun.
Oh, coffee pot, not teapot.
No, yeah. So anyway, in this arrangement, Paul wrote for me, for the guitar player, the solo from Little Willie Leaps. Okay.
The
So we're
solo
going
that
through
Bunnett played, or that
The bird solo.
bird solo from Little Willie Leaps. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, so I turn the page. I'm looking at this music. I turn the page. I'm like, fuck, holy shit! It's all 16th notes, and I'm like, and I just, I've never really been a great sight. I could read music, but I'm not a great sight reader. I think because of I have ADHD, my mind wanders too much. But that's another story. Anyway,
I have
so
the same problem, I think.
yeah, so anyway, so all 16th notes. So Paul Jeffrey, he stops the band, he looks at me with a side eye, goes, "Can't read, huh?" Then he says, "People, if you can't play your parts, if you can't read your parts, if you can't play your parts, you're not getting any solos." You know.
Oh,
So basically, at the end of the class, I said to Paul, I said, "Can I take that chart home, please?" And he was happy about that because that I was 16, I was 17, you know, and I heard Charlie Parker, but I didn't absorb it. I if I heard him or Sonny Stitt or any other alto player, then I wouldn't have known the difference at that time.
so this
So
was your the first college you went to. I'm getting straight. So you got out of high school, and you went to Hartford right away.
yes, and
And
that's all.
did that have to do with, um, because if you didn't know who Jackie McLean was really, or these people,
When I
what
was 16, I didn't. Yeah.
what drew you to that school?
At school because my friend Jeff, who had all those records,
Uh-huh.
said, "Do you know who Jackie McLean is?" He goes, "Oh yeah, he's one of the great alto saxophone players. He's like a protege of Bird. He was he was like the the next generation. So I was going to go to Berkeley, and that's a long story, but I got rejected to Berkeley. I'm the only person that ever got rejected from Berkeley.
That's funny because they'll take anybody's money.
I know. Well, what happened was I was a very rebellious kid, rock and roller with long hair, And when we took the SAT scores in high school, I said, "I'm not reading any of this," and I just filled in all the little blanks without reading any of the questions. So I got very, very low SAT scores in Berkeley, but I had been writing music, and when I applied to Hartt School of Music, they saw that I had promise as a composer, and that's how I got in there. So, they weren't worried about the SAT scores because they saw I could actually write music.
Oh,
So that's why I went to Harvard. And then the first week of school, our guest artist was Woody Shaw.
wow.
And at that point, I knew I was so glad I didn't go to Berkeley because I was able to get a real conservatory, the full thing with piano lessons, classical, all the counterpoint to history, all the instrumentation, orchestration, and have the greatest guest artists every week because Jackie brought up everybody, you
Oh
know.
man, I never really, I always wanted to know like what went on there. I knew Jackie was there, and I never really heard what a
There was
great
no,
place
yeah,
this was to study, and
yeah.
it had a great reputation. But you're letting me know now things I didn't know about what was available there.
Well, at that time, early on, before I came, there was a big heroin problem at the University of Hartford, where Hartt School of Music was. And Jackie came up. He was straight. He was sober, and he was starting to counsel people. And they needed some form of jazz at the school, but there was
Please,
never a degree. I got no degree.
please go there. They needed some form of jazz.
Okay, so the school, there was no jazz degree program at Hartt School of Music when I was there. I was getting a degree in composition. I took all the jazz courses that existed, but they were all extracurricular. So I didn't need those credits. So I was very, very busy, but I had a great experience as a result. I learned a lot. So there was no degree. So Jackie was brought up partly as a figurehead to start a very small jazz program with no degree and to be partly a drug counselor. But when I was there, I don't know if he was doing drug counseling or not. I had no idea. But I knew that when I saw Dexter Gordon and Jimmy Heath and Woody Shaw and Sahib Shahab, Sadiq Hakim, all these and younger people that Jackie would bring up every week, and Paul, I knew I was in the right place, and Paul was really the teacher. Jackie was a little bit more of a figurehead because I wasn't taking saxophone lessons at the time. But Paul Jeffrey, he was the one that encouraged me to write arrangements. He was the one that that kicked my ass when I had to learn that Charlie Parker solo. So, like getting back to the Charlie Parker solo, I took that chart home and I shed all week, nonstop. And I came back the next week, we played it again, and I nailed it.
All
And
right.
and what Paul said, he goes, "You can solo now." That
There
was
you
his
go.
response. You can solo now. Because he said, if you can't play your parts, you can't solo. So, I mean, and we were friends all through school. We really knew each other, and then actually when Sonny Rollins needed a guitar player because the two guitar players that he had before me were Russell Malone and Peter Bernstein, and they were both pretty busy. So Sonny wanted someone more dedicated. And Paul said, send Sonny your CD, which it was John Hicks, Montez Coleman, and Gerald Cannon.
Oh.
I sent him my CD, and I get a call. Well, Saul, I was listening to your CD, and I would like a chance to play with you. And I look at the phone, and it says, I thought it was a phony phone call. I look at the phone, the old phones where I had the number on the phone. It says Theodore Rollins. I'm like, holy, this is really him. I thought it was a joke.
So they say even if you don't have them in your contact, it says who it is.
Well, in the old phones, sometimes it had it was a wired phone, it wasn't, maybe it was wireless, but it was not a cell phone.
So Sonny called you because Paul had.
Yeah, Paul recommended me, and he recommended me a few times, and finally, Sonny called. We talked on the phone for hours and hours and hours, and then finally I got to play with him, you know.
Paul was a sweet cat, man. He was when I was on Mingus's band. I was like 21, and Mingus could be rather difficult at certain times.
That's
And
all I've
some
heard.
nights, yeah, some nights Mingus would just have it in for you. And Paul was often around because Paul did some of the copying of the parts
Yeah, yeah,
for Mingus. He'd done a little orchestration for him and
right.
that kind of stuff. So we were at the five spot like 5 nights a week, and it was called Two Saints then, but it was the five spot. And Paul would come in, and I must say that Paul was one reason I didn't totally lose my mind some nights.
Yeah,
Paul could talk me down when I'd be
yeah,
on the verge of tears from
yeah,
from what was going on. And Paul
right,
would say, don't worry, you gotta, like keep your head about you. And
right.
he was a really beautiful cat. Yeah.
Yeah, I learned a lot from him, and he said, you know, you got to listen to Grant Green because I could tell you kind of know the blues because I had been playing rock for so long already. He goes, you got to listen to Grant Green, Wes Montgomery, George Benson, and I mean, I was, but honestly, it's embarrassing for me to admit, but I wasn't that intrigued by jazz guitar. That's the instrument I played. I was intrigued by tenor saxophone, trumpet, bass and drums, and piano. And Jackie, the first thing he said to us in class was, the first record you listen to is the Amazing Bud Powell Volumes 1 and 2. So I immediately went out and listened to them. You know, so he pushed, and he talked about Bird constantly. So my roommate lived in Greenwich. He used to go down to Greenwich, Connecticut, and they had a great library, and they had a big record collection. And he would come back like every couple of weeks to go home to see his parents or whatever in Greenwich, Connecticut. He'd come back with like 20, 30 records. So
Oh,
even before we started buying records, we had all these records, and it was just like such a great, great, great experience.
yes,
So,
everybody needed a friend like that. I had Brooks Kerr,
uh-huh.
who literally had, a couple thousand records.
Yeah,
I mean, it was amazing. He wanted to hear Benny Carter's big band from 1937.
yeah.
He'd say, "Oh, here's a good idea of what he was doing." It
Yeah,
was,
because I never had a jazz teacher in high school. I didn't play in the jazz band, because I was a rocker. They didn't even have a guitar. So, um, I was a real rocker when I was a kid, but I was playing really well. And
mm,
but the problem was when I was starting to get pain in my left arm because I was playing like Jimmy Page too low, and my
oh,
technique was bad. So I took classical guitar lessons for my senior year in high school, and it set me straight. I learned how to hold the guitar. So much happened with between 14 and 17. And then from 17 to 21, I ended up being in college and being a family man by 21. So much happened. Then the club dates, all that nonsense. But Paul was instrumental in my gig with Sonny Rollins, and unfortunately they had a big falling out at the end of towards the end of Paul's life. And it was sad because Paul would call me, "Did you talk to Sonny? He doesn't want to talk to me." And I was really sad. But they
Sonny,
were like him, Jimmy Heath, and Sonny, they were like all like super tight. But
yeah,
Paul was super tight with Mingus, he was super tight with Monk, super tight with Sonny, and Paul did Monk's last tour, I believe.
yes, he did. In
In
fact,
Japan.
Lonnie
In Japan.
Hillier, but
Yeah.
also he played a concert in New York with
Yeah.
with Lonnie Hillier, and I remember that happened, and I was going to go to that concert because Lonnie and I were good friends, but I had like I got a gig that night, so I didn't get to go to the concert. But I remember he told me that he was in a band, and I think it was Monk with Paul Jeffrey and this and that. And
Yeah, I think Paul was in Europe and he put somebody on the phone with Sonny. Like he was in Italy and they were like hanging out and maybe drinking a little bit or something. And like he put this drummer, I won't mention his name, but he put this drummer on the phone with Sonny. I don't think Sonny liked it. I think that, I had a close call with him because I forget what we were talking about, but I mentioned the name John Coltrane and he got really quiet. And I was saying, I think that what I said was, to me, it sounded like John Coltrane practiced a lot and he was playing what he practiced. And Sonny got really, really quiet. And I said, he goes, "Well, Saul, I practiced a lot too." I said, "Yes, I know. But my point is that Train sounded like he was playing what he practiced. You never sound like anything except for spontaneous, beautiful improvisation. I said, you're always on your improvisations are so fresh. It just sounds like pure music coming." And he goes, "Oh, okay, Saul." you know, and because I was trying to make a point that because I mean, as much Train maybe was my biggest influence in music. But it did sound like, he was working on stuff and he practiced constantly. Paul used to tell me sometimes they'd hang out at Sonny's at Train's house, and his wife would be cooking, and there'd be a couple of people hanging around, and Train would be in the bedroom practicing, and he'd come out and say hello, and then he'd go back in the room and practice. Like, and everyone was hanging out at his house, but he wasn't hanging out with them; he was practicing. So, and some of what he worked out, how his innovations were staggering. I don't think anyone. Some people hated it. They say that, Coleman Hawkins didn't like him, the Sheets of Sound. Some of the old guys didn't like him.
well, I
But
think when it went beyond the sheets of sound, I
later,
think I think
yeah.
the later stuff was pretty. I mean, Ira Gidler just said, well, basically he felt that Train became a religious fanatic, and that the music was tied up with a certain kind of religious, you know, uh,
That's
feeling.
what music, that's what music is really supposed to be. Like
Yeah.
I love all of it. I love 1956 to 1966. I have no problem with anything. The only thing I don't really love is Ascension because he had some players there that didn't have he had some players there. I mean, half the band were masters, the other half were students who were squeaking and squawking.
Yeah, I found that with Ascension, but but I like Interstellar Space.
Yes, absolutely.
There's moments on that are like,
Expression, I love Late Train. It took some getting used to. I mean, but 1958, oh my God, I mean, it changed music. That's
yeah.
when I was born. But so when I was talking about Coltrane, yeah, Sonny got very quiet. But and then he used to talk about, well, he would say, I like guitar because pianists they play those big chords. And I don't like those big chords. He goes, I like guitar because they don't play. And he goes, but there was a guitar player I really liked. I'm like, yeah, who? No, who do you think?
Hey,
Jim Hall.
Jim Hall. He
And
said,
then he goes, but there were a couple of pianists I really, really liked. I'm like, oh yeah, who were they? It's like Bud Powell and Tommy Flanagan.
uh huh.
Yeah, so that, but all right, so I did the tour. Um, I did the tour. We did we did Detroit Jazz Festival, then we did a gig at San Francisco, and then we did a European tour for a month, and that was it. And he never played again.
That was it.
That
Was right, and then he
was
stopped playing.
2012. It's 2012. Um, but yeah, so it
Who else
was
was in the band?
the band was Sammy Figueroa, Clifton Anderson, Bob Cranshaw, and the drummer was Kobe Watkins.
Oh,
Anyway, so and I became pretty close with Sammy. We hung a lot because he was a lot of fun.
he was. I understand.
Sammy, a lot of great experiences, a lot of great things that Sammy did. He was involved in so many different aspects of the business. You know, he played with so many different styles, and and Bob was the nicest person I ever met.
All
Big
right.
huge fan. Bob Crenshaw, he was
All
an
right.
he used to call me every day in Europe when we were at the hotel. He called, "We're having dinner at this place. Please join us." And I would go. He never accepted a penny. He always he always took me out. He always included me. He called me every day, and he was such a wonderful person.
He
And
was.
Sammy was great too.
He was an incredible. And who's that? Yeah, Bob was. When we did that record date, I mean, in fact,
Yes, yeah,
we did the record date at your studio,
yes.
and my daughter Emily made a tribute to Peggy Lee, which is
There you
a
go.
beautiful record. And Saul played on part of the record, and Joe Cohn played on
Right, right.
other tunes.
Was a great friend of mine too, Joe Cohen, one of the
Oh,
great guitar players of this generation.
and then we had Cranshaw, Bob played bass, and we
Yep,
had Jimmy Wormworth on drums,
right.
and Ehud Ashiri, young at the time, he's still kind of young, piano
Yeah,
player, was there. And Cranshaw really, I remember there were things like that he had played with Peggy, and there were a couple of tricky little things in the arrangements, like that tune "Waiting for the Train to Come In." That I mean, that would have taken us hours to get to. I mean, to really get it right. And Bob was so articulate. He says, "You see, now here it's a double time, and then at this point it goes back to the halftime," and he explained it to us like the best school teacher in the world. Like, here, it does this, and let's go over this part, and that's it. Once we get that part, then the thing's easy. And we got it through his tutelage. And
right.
then we paid him. I think I may have told you this story, but when we went to pay him at the end of the day, he gave us our money back.
No, I didn't know that.
Yeah, he gave Emily her money back. He said, "You guys are family. I don't take money from family."
Look at that, man. Yeah, he said to me, if I'm playing in a bar mitzvah band and it's the worst bar mitzvah band in the world, I'm gonna be the best bar mitzvah bass player I could be. That's the kind of, and he went from Saturday Night Live to Sesame Street to playing on how many Blue Note records and and how many records was he on? And I got to say something about that session in regard to Bob. Bob at that time really wasn't playing a lot of upright bass. He was playing mostly what he called the pork chop, right? But he had one of those basses, I think it was Colstein, where they have the whole bottom is cut off and they got no sound. So you put a microphone on it, and we were all in the same room. So it was an old school recording where this bleed, and I did all the recordings that I did. I tried to emulate that room sound for the classic recordings as much as possible. And I think I did
Great.
good as an engineer.
You were
And,
great as an engineer.
but anyway,
Emily sang with room sound too. She didn't
yeah,
sing in any booth or anything,
right,
and we just did it all in one or two takes every tune.
right. But I got
Go
to
ahead
say,
with the Bob with the bass. So
the point is that when you record acoustic bass with drums in the room, a lot of times there's a lot of drums in the if you have the mic live. I had gobos, partitions, but Bob brought this bass with no sound. I plugged him into a direct box and the microphone, but the microphone had so much bleed because the bass had very little sound. And I've never gotten a good sound with a direct box. It was a nice tube direct box. It was a pretty nice piece of gear, but this is the only time I ever did a session where I only used the direct box and it sounded amazing. And it never sounded amazing because he had such a touch that even on that bass with a direct box, it sounded great. And the bass ended up sounding really good on the record. And it never sounds good like that. So I
wow,
was very impressed at how because when we played, he was using a solid body upright bass on Sonny's gig, but most of the time, other gigs I played with him in the past, he was playing the Fender bass,
Well, I had insisted on that date with Emily.
Yeah,
Well, I don't insist that hard, but
yeah,
I really asked him if he could please play the real bass for it.
right, right.
And
It's those Colstein basses. I don't know. I don't want to say the wrong name, but those basses with the whole bottom cut off, it's like half a bass, and all the resonant part where all the bass resonates doesn't exist in those. They're totally electric instruments. So to get a good sound with a direct box on one of those basses is not easy for an engineer, but Bob made it sound really good. I was like really, aside from him being such a wonderful guy, and I had no idea he gave the money back. That shows what a great guy he was.
he didn't accept the money. Actually, we didn't even get as far as giving it to
Oh,
him.
oh, oh, oh,
He just
okay.
went, no, no, no. He said, your family. I don't
Right.
take money from family.
No, I was so happy to be able to both engineer it and play on half the record. So that was a great experience for me.
Yeah,
And
he
it
played great
sounded
on it,
great. Yeah, Emily really did a great job on that. So
and the engineering is beautiful. I think it sounds as it's really. I'm proud of the whole record, and
that's good. I always tried to go for the old school sound, I didn't have, I did treat the room to sound really good as a live room because I was doing a lot of live performances in my space, so
you had a regular session there. I remember
yeah.
that you did that. But
Oh, yeah.
how many records did you record up there, and how long? Let's
I
talk
have
a little
no
bit about the history of
of
Zeb.
Zeb.
How did it start? And yeah, tell us about that. It's
Well,
a beautiful story.
let's see. I had been, early on, when the MIDI craze and all the electronic stuff I wanted to learn about that to be contemporary in the music field, so I had the synthesizers, blah, blah, blah. When I got my first loft space, I started doing some live recordings, but I really had no experience as a live engineer, so I had a lot of trial and error. I was in this other building on 28th Street, and I had a studio there, and I was cutting my teeth as an engineer. But then we found this amazing, and then I had to give that up, and my stuff was in storage. And I found this amazing space, which was the one that you were at, and it was a big, big loft on the second floor of an old firehouse on 28th Street. And so I was able to treat the room. Actually, in college, as a composition major, I took an elective called Acoustics for Musicians.
Oh,
I'm terrible with numbers and math, but I'm great with spatial relationships.
oh.
And as a result, I kind of learned how to treat a room, even on a budget, to make a room sound good with the appropriate reflections, with some wood, with the right absorption, with all this stuff that I learned about in
So,
that
so,
class.
so you built this. In other words, basically
I
you.
built it for everything from scratch in that studio, and it was very unconventional. It was all about playing in the same room in a very good sounding room. It was
So
about
right down to the
using.
carpentry.
Yeah, I did everything. And I
Wow.
had no money. So, I mean, and the rent was crazy. So the only thing I bought was an air conditioner for $600. That was and everything else I found on the street, which was the most karmic experiences of my life. Because first recording, got to build gobos. I went outside, all the wood, somebody had thrown out all this
Wait,
lumber.
Bill Gobos. What does that mean?
Gobos are the partitions around the drums, or around the bass. I needed these partitions. So I said, I got to go to the lumber yard and buy all this wood. And I went outside. It was all thrown out in front of my building. Like God said, I'm going to
Wow.
give you the lumber. So I built these things
Serendipity.
and everything I needed. There was a hotel that was going out of business that was redoing their carpeting, and they had remnants of brand new carpeting in a garbage bin. I needed carpeting for some absorption around the drums, around the bandstand. I got all this free carpeting that was brand new. It was all on the street. Almost everything that I found, when I needed something, it was there on the street. I got to tell you, it really made me question my belief in God, which I like to use the word nature because nature, you could debate whether God exists or not, but you can't debate nature. Nature, you can't argue with me about nature.
You and Spinoza.
Oh, okay.
Me. And but that's very funny because one of the things that Sonny and I talked about a lot over the years, and I was just going to bring that up as you mentioned that. is that when you talk about spiritual beliefs, and like, um, I felt that though that the way God or the divine, whatever it is, that what's larger than us, the all in all, the Rosicrucians call it, however you want to call it, Hashem, you know, um, but the Creator is through serendipitous events and other people.
Right,
I mean, the way we meet each other, the way
right,
we hook up with people, the tapestry of our lives,
right.
in the sense of how we have a certain idea, and next thing you know, like you saying, there's the wood right in front of your house. All you
Yeah,
did was envision it and will it, and then,
yeah.
and there it was. And your life, and I've been told by people, and I think I could say this to you because I know something of your life, and I'm learning more. But some people have said to me. In fact, my therapist told me this. He said, "Your life, the serendipity of the events of your life is not normal. It's." And I said, "No, it is normal. I think if you look at everybody's life, there are these events that
Right.
happen. It's just being aware that it's there,
And being open to it.
being open to it, and then spotting it when it's there.
Right, right, right.
Being open to it because things happen to people, but they just ignore it a lot of the time too."
Yeah, yeah, I know. There was one time where I moved into a new apartment and I needed the table to put, the table for my computer and to my desk. And I walked around the corner and I said, God, I'm gonna go online and see if I order the table. There were 9 glass tables from IKEA, brand new on the street.
Really?
So I went to the office that I was currently had my studio at. It was later, much later on, and I got my hand truck, and I took 3 of these tables, brand new. I still have well, one fell and broke, but I have 2 of these glass tables. All I did was ask for them, and I swear to God, right around the corner they were there. So this is one time I said I want to find a leather jacket for $100 at the 99-cent store. And
Uh,
I went into the 99-cent store and there was one leather jacket that fit me. And you know what? The next time I wanted a leather jacket, I said the same thing and the same thing happened.
no, really?
Yes, it's very weird.
Yeah. Well, that's amazing. I mean, you know, um, I tell this story a lot, but I'll tell it very fast. When I met Lee Konitz, I was in Florida, and I heard this record called Motion Lee,
Uh,
and it was the first record I'd heard where somebody, besides Jackie, but somebody played different than Bird, and I was tremendously attracted to it from hearing that trio with Elvin and Lee and the bass player Sonny Dallas. This
uh-huh.
record, a drummer down there, Jimmy Chapek, played it for me. So I was living at the university pretty much. I didn't go to school there, but I hung there all the time. And Jerry Coker had made me part of the university band. I was a featured soloist, blah, blah, blah. But then I saw it was Easter vacation, and there were rides to New York for like $15 round trip at that time. This is 1969.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I call up and I say, "Can I get a ride?" "Oh, you're the last person. We got 4 people, and you're the fourth, and that's all we're taking. No more room in the van, but you got it." So I had exactly the money to get to New York, and I had read in the Village Voice because I'd lived in New York the year before, and I kept getting the Voice wherever I was. Even in Miami, you had to buy it, but I'd buy it. And I saw in the back that Lee Konitz had an ad, and it
Oh,
was it was Lee Konitz in the education section, instruction section.
oh, great.
It said teaching all instruments, all levels, advanced, intermediate, beginner, tone deaf. That was what his ad said. And so I got the thing, and so the next day they were leaving, and it was 10 days in New York. I think 8 days in New York, and then a day to travel back and forth. So I got all the way to Washington, D.C., and I realized I forgot something. I forgot to tell my friend Brooks Kerr that I was coming to New York and I wanted to stay with him, which, his house was always open to me. There was no problem with that. but it would be good to let him know I'm coming. So I went and called him up, and he said, well, "Sure, you can stay with me. Why so suddenly?" I said, "I got to meet Lee Konitz. I heard this record and blah 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 and this and that, and I pray, He says, "Oh well, I'm going out to the half note to hear Roy Eldridge tonight, but I'm going to leave the key under the pot of flowers on my doorstep of our townhouse. So just come in." It was in New York you could trust at that time, believe it or not. You could leave your key under a pot of flowers and you would be safe. And come on in, let yourself, make yourself at home. I'll be back about 2 in the morning or something after Roy, after the half note. So Brooks was
Yeah.
blind, and 2 o'clock the door comes open, and there's Brooks, looking like I always say the cat that ate the canary. He's got a huge smile, and he says, "Man, you're not gonna believe what happened." You know, um, I was sitting at the half note. I listened to Roy Eldridge, and the guy sitting next to me at the bar was very erudite and knew a lot about Roy. And I got into this really good conversation with him between sets. Make a long story short, he was Lee Konitz.
Oh, yeah.
He gave
Yeah.
me this address. He says, "Show up at 4 o'clock tomorrow." He
Oh,
was
that's
sitting
great.
at his studio, and I ended up making my first record with Lee a couple of years after that,
Yeah.
and having a lifelong 50-year friendship.
Wow, that's beautiful.
But and your life is full of these things too. And
Things happen. Yeah, I had a John Hicks experience. I was at this bar, the Angry Squire,
I
and I
remember
was hanging out, I was hanging out, and these young whippersnappers from the new school weren't letting me sit in. I won't mention any names, but some of them are big names now. They weren't letting me sit in. They didn't know who I was. So I'm hanging out with these two guys. One was Frank Hewitt, who was a great bebop player at New York, an unsung hero, very, very much unknown, but known to New York. Frank
lived in
Hewitt,
the basement of Smalls.
right?
Not
And then,
really.
at the Angry Squire, then I'm talking to this other guy for like an hour, and I'm not going to say what he was talking about, but I'm talking to him. We're really hitting it off. I was like, "Hey man," and I say, "Hey man, what's your name?" He goes, "John Hicks." I'm like, "John Hicks," So it was, it's like, and it's just so beautiful. And we remained friends, and he ended up on one of my records, a quartet record, and they used to rehearse at my loft sometimes, and John was a good friend and a wonderful person. I got the honor of him recording with me. I also recorded him on occasions in my studio. So
Oh,
John,
no.
like John was really like very, very deep, much deeper than people realize, because a lot of the stuff that he did was like with Pharoah Sanders and in that genre with what's his name, the singer who used to yodel,
Jolie,
Thomas,
Leon Thomas.
Leon
Leon
Thomas,
Thomas.
yeah. But John, when I went to his house, to rehearse for this record, he's got like Shostakovich on the piano. He's got all this, and he used to play sometimes at the this outdoor thing. It was an upright piano by the park near the library. And he would play all kinds. John was so deep.
John was deep. He's on one of my records too.
And when at his memorial service, they were talking about him, and they were saying, well, he at 7 years old, he was the choir master of his father's church. I'm like,
Yeah.
man, this guy was really, really, and he was so sweet, and he was so deep. I mean, and he just had to. The funny, he told me a story about the first time he met Thelonious Monk, and it was such a great story. So he had just moved to New York, and he's up near Lincoln Center around there. He sees these two guys pushing a piano down the sidewalk, and they come to the curb, and the piano's teeter-tottering, and they're like both, and John runs up and helps them center the piano. And guess who it was? It was Monk and Walter Davis Jr. And they all went back to Monk's house, and Monk and Walter traded tunes, and John told me he just sat there in awe, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah. Walter told me a great Monk story too. While we're on it, he said a very funny thing. He said one day he's hanging with Monk at his house, and all of a sudden Monk launches into like, "Oh, got your rhythm, up tempo," and with lines flowing, a perfect Bud Powell. And Walter kind of looks at him with shock because Monk is all of a sudden playing like Bud. He's doing this. And then Walter's like, and Monk says, don't tell no one.
Yeah.